I'll be honest with you, I did not plan to bring this back before Tarnished Edition. But I also expected Tarnished Edition to come out much earlier. We don't even know when it's coming out. And honestly, the chances of it doing anything exciting become lower by the minute. I seriously have zero expectations for this. With that said, it's been a while, so it's about time. Next up is the Frigid Executioner. This build centers around using the Putrescence Cleaver. I've seen many people complain about this weapon because you can't throw it like a boomerang like the boss does. And I seriously don't understand where they're coming from. Bitch, you become the boomerang. And if that's not the coolest thing ever, I don't know what is. We have so much hyper armor with this. We continue attacking bosses without a care in the world, and we're very hard to kill. And all the acrobatics that we're doing make it so that we're actually harder to hit than usual. Now let's break this down. The weapon art has it so that the first input makes you jump into the air and deliver a very powerful overhead attack. From there you have two options. One is to press the weapon art button a second time, and this will have us continue spinning and attacking 3 more times. And you can actually continue doing that until you run out of FP or stamina. The best part is that the FP and stamina costs are very, very low. You only lose 12 FP for the first attack, and each follow-up combo only costs 7 FP. So you can actually maintain this for a very long time if you have a long attack window. The other option that you have is to follow up with a heavy attack instead. You can do this after the first attack in the weapon art or after a follow-up combo. This will actually also deliver a 3-hit combo, but it will deliver it faster with more damage and it will end your combo, meaning that you get no follow-up attacks after that. You have to start over. Besides the damage and speed, there is another advantage to ending your combo instead of going for a follow-up attack, and that is that the follow-up ends with you being in an arched position, where you have to go through this longer animation of you standing back up before you can do anything, while the combo ender ends with you standing upright, ready to do anything else immediately after. So there is this mastery aspect to this weapon, where you should know whether to extend your combo or to end it at a given time, because like you obviously want to get as many hits with this as possible. But not ending your combo at the right time can be the reason that you get hit, or miss the repost on a stance broken enemy. Now the fact that we're hitting so often with so much hyper armor makes this a perfect pairing with, say it with me now, Malenia's Great Rune. Malenia's Great Rune makes it very hard for us to get killed with this weapon, because we just keep recovering our health. I mean, look at this moment when I'm fighting Radahn. I was very close to dying here, but Malenia's Great Rune saved me from that, and I ended up killing him afterwards. Now let's talk about the real coolest thing about this weapon, and that is that it's perfect for Elden Ring's very precise hitboxes. See, the weapon art has us jump high in the air, and then spin in a low profile stance, and that makes it so that it's very likely that you'll end up jumping over or crouching under so many boss attacks, and these moments can be very cinematic. I guess one final thing to mention about this weapon is that it does get some frostbite buildup. It's not a lot, but it will usually trigger frostbite once in a given boss fight, which is nice to have. In my offhand, I have the Frenzied Flame Seal, which I use to cast Golden Vow and Black Flame Protection, and we need this to make trading hits with bosses be viable. For talismans, I'm using the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman for more physical defense. The Shard of Alexander is an obvious choice since we're using our weapon art even more often than our regular attacks. And since we do attack a lot, the multi-hit talismans are also an obvious choice. For the physic, we have the Opaline Heart tier for more defense, and the Thorny Crack tier for more damage with consecutive attacks. For the look, we have the Helmet of Solitude, Blight's Armor, Blight's Gauntlets, and Rellana's Greaves. I didn't think that I'd ever enjoy using this weapon, to be honest, but here we are. I guess Malenia's Great Rune really just fixes everything in this game. I want you to join my Discord server. You know, being a part of a community while it's still small is very fun in my opinion. And I want you to come ruin it by joining, so that you can enjoy it while making it worse for those who come after. Just like the boomers did in America. We have an LFG channel where you can play Night Rain with me and other members of this community. There's no reason for you not to join. Link in the description below. Next up, we have the Dragon Acolyte. This build makes use of one of the least used weapons in Elden Ring, that being the Grafted Dragon, which, unless you played Night Rain where it's amazing, you probably think this one sucks. I mean, it is a fist weapon that is not paired like the other ones, and you can't even two-hand it like in the older games. Now, the weapon art on this weapon overrides your right-handed weapon art like a shield would. But why would you ever want to do that when the damage is this pathetic? Well, it turns out that this weapon has a few quirks. First off, you don't have to use this as a secondary weapon or a one-handed fist, because you can actually pair it with other fist weapons or even itself on New Game Plus to get the normal fist power stance moveset. You do lose out on the power stanced heavy attack you get with other fist weapons, but to be honest, in terms of poise damage, the one-handed heavy attack is only slightly worse than the other one. Now, what do you get in exchange for that? Do you get more range or something? No.
Despite what it looks like, this actually has the smallest range of all fist weapons. All you get is a unique weapon art, and despite what it looked like in the intro, it's actually not bad at all. It's true that the damage of the fire it spews is very low, but the damage of the initial explosion that spews that fire is pretty damn high, which is a very weird design decision. At first, I thought this wasn't intended, but 4 years later, this still works the exact same way as it did at launch. So what this is actually a high damaging melee attack with some lingering damage. Kinda similar to how the Candlestand Great Hammer works. Except it makes way more sense for that one to work like that because of how the animation looks like. Our weapon art deals pure fire damage and scales purely with faith, which is unfortunate considering that the weapon itself scales more with strength. Though I found that strength scaling to be relatively weak. It doesn't boost our melee damage nearly as much as Faith boosts our weapon art. And since the weapon art deals pure fire damage, it's easier to buff it with more things. Not to mention that increasing our faith makes this weapon's split damage lean a bit harder towards dealing fire damage, which means that the weapon itself benefits slightly more from fire boosting buffs, which does help bridge the gap. Now, having 25 faith on this build is non-negotiable, because Golden Vow is just too beneficial. Now, investing the rest of our stats into strength is only gonna give us a 6-ish% damage boost to melee damage. But investing more into faith will give us a much bigger boost to our weapon art damage and give us access to tons of useful incantations. So I made the choice to go in that direction instead. To cast incantations, I'm using the Air Tree Seal, which does have the highest scaling at our faith level. I'm using it to cast Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength to boost our damage and defense. Usually I like using defensive buffs over Flame Grant Me Strength, and that's because they have more duration and because I'm usually using melee weapons with elements other than fire, so Flame Grant Me Strength would give me less of a buff. But here, it gives us the full damage buff for our melee weapons and it boosts our weapon art, so that's why I'm using it. Of course, you can use the seal to cast many offensive incantations very effectively, and there are just so many spells that complement this playstyle very well. But at the very least, you'll be using incantations to get access to different elemental types for when you're facing bosses that are strong against fire damage, or to cast ranged spells to maintain stance damage from a distance. For talismans, the Shard of Alexander is an obvious choice to boost our weapon art damage. Fire Scorpion Charm buffs our fire damage in exchange for us taking more physical damage. The trade-off is worth it for me, but if it isn't for you, then feel free to replace it with anything else. I'd recommend either using the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman or Millicent's Prosthesis in its place if you don't like the reduced negation. Next, we have the Rotten Winged Sword Insignia for more damage with consecutive attacks, because we do have a pretty quick moveset. And finally, we have the Blade of Mercy. The heavy attacks on our weapon come out fast enough that you can stance break bosses fairly often if you use them. And bosses take time to get back up after a repost, which is a perfect opportunity to use the weapon art. For the physic, I of course have the Flame Shroud and Crack Tier for more fire damage, and the Thorny Crack Tier to give us more damage with consecutive attacks. For the look, I have the altered version of the Depraved Perfumer Robe, the Aristocrat Headband, the Warrior Greaves, and the Highwayman Gauntlets. This build is definitely not as powerful as using a normal fist weapon, but it is a unique take on that playstyle, which I do enjoy a lot. Next, we have the Bestial Assassin. In most fantasy media, assassins are portrayed as skinny and agile, but I wanted this character to be different. I was kind of inspired by Letho from The Witcher 2, especially in its opening cinematic, where he is portrayed as being inhumanly agile, but also an absolute hunk of a man. And Elden Ring at first seemed to be the perfect place to replicate this fantasy, especially because of how the one weapon that boosts special incantations just so happens to be a dagger. And so I've had this idea at the back of my mind basically since release, but the problem is, it just didn't work. And there are so many reasons for that. Let's start by looking at the main weapon that I wanted to use, which is the Cinquedea. And well, this might be one of the worst weapons in the entire game. It's a somber weapon, meaning that we can't buff it, we can't infuse it to have different scalings, or change its weapon art. And instead of giving it a unique weapon art, FromSoft made it be stuck with Quickstep, which is not bad by any means, but things only get worse from here. One of the main reasons to use daggers is crit damage. Daggers deal disproportionately high crit damage compared to other weapon types because they have high crit multipliers. Not the Cinquedea though. It has the base crit multiplier, because FromSoft thought it was okay to just remove that basic feature that other daggers have. So this weapon just doesn't work as a primary option, no matter how you slice it. Its only purpose is to buff your bestial incantations by 10%. You'd then hope that they're really good to justify that, right? Well, no, they're mediocre at best. They have low damage and they don't even deal high stance damage like you might expect. The only reason to use them is if you're using a pure faith build and really need to deal physical damage. Except best threats are better for that, so no. The only other reason to use them is to use them for fun, I guess. Which, don't get me wrong, we're perfectly happy to do this on the series, but this just has too many things going against it. It doesn't stop there, because the seal you'd want to use this with, you know, the Clawmark seal, also sucks. And it specifically sucks more with the Cinquedea. It scales as much with faith as it does with strength, and you need to invest in both to get higher scaling. And the Cinquedea has no faith scaling, so that's a conflict of interest.
The scaling of the seal is just not very good, whether you invest in faith, strength, or both. So your options are to either go with strength, sacrificing spell damage for a pitiful amount of extra dagger damage, or go with faith and end up with less than mediocre spell scaling with no melee damage to speak of. And so for the longest time, I thought this playstyle was just not possible. I tried so many things to make these two pieces of equipment work, but I just failed time and time again. And it's a real shame because these two look like they were made for each other. If you were to up the stance damage on these spells and give the Cinquedea a better crit multiplier, then you'd have a very fun playstyle. But I guess it was just not meant to be. Except then I had this thought. Why even use them at all? Just because they're seemingly designed to fit this playstyle that we're going for doesn't mean that we ever had to use them in the first place. FromSoft is likely never gonna make these changes that I want, and so it's about time that we moved on. And so I decided to use a Holy Infused Earthsteel Dagger along with the Earthtree Seal, and then just spec all into Faith. The Earthtree Seal has so much more incantation scaling than the Clawmark Seal that it outdamages it even when casting Bestial incantations. And the Earthsteel Dagger? Oh, this one runs circles around the Cinquedea. It has so many things going for it. It has a better moveset, a higher crit multiplier, and it has faith scaling, so our build can be much more coherent. And so the idea of the build now is that we use the uncharged heavy attack of the Earthsteel Dagger as our primary attack option, and we supplement that with spell casts when enemies get out of range. The quick moveset of the dagger allows us to build up consecutive attack buffs very quickly, and this greatly boosts our melee and spell damage, and it even winds up working for us much better as a damage buff for these spells than the Cinquedea ever did. We also have 51 poise, meaning that we can poise through some enemy attacks. And since our build can attack fairly often, I'm also stacking defensive buffs, and I'm using Malenia's Great Rune. Because of course I fucking am! Have you even been on this channel? Our weapon art of choice is Sacred Order. This applies a weapon buff that increases all damage that we deal by 10%. And the funny thing is, the Cinquedea increases our spell damage by the same amount, meaning that we're getting the same buff except now it applies to our melee damage and we're able to use the multi-hit buffs because of the better moveset. So yeah, we're just completely outclassing the Cinquedea. For what spells to use, we use Golden Vow and Black Flame Protection for more damage and defense. And you might think to use Bestial Vitality, but we actually have access to Blessing of the Earthtree, which is a much better spell if you want passive healing. And for offensive spells, we have 4. Gurank's Beast Claw is an AoE spell that you can use against groups of trash mobs, but it's not really useful for anything else. I use Bestial Sling as an extension of my melee moveset. It doesn't deal as much damage as the dagger, but it has more range, so I use it to keep up the aggression for when enemies back away. Also, spells work with Malenia's Great Rune, meaning that sometimes you can get a little bit of health back if you can't use melee, which is pretty neat. The other 2 spells are Stone of Gurank and Beast Claw. And well, Stone of Gurank is better in every way for single enemies, while Beast Claw can be more useful if you're trying to hit multiple enemies at once. For talismans, we're obviously using both of the consecutive attack talismans, and we're also using the Dragoncrest Great Shield for more physical defense. The final slot is a Flex slot, and I think you have 3 options here. The Flux Canvas Talisman gives us more spell damage, although I lean towards not using it, since spells aren't really the main source of damage for us, but it's still a good option. Since we're using a dagger as our primary weapon, using the Dagger Talisman can actually be pretty good if you want to get even more insane damage out of these reposts. But you could also use the Blade of Mercy Talisman instead, which I did end up doing. The repost animation has 2 parts, and the effect of this talisman activates after the first part, meaning that it buffs the second part of the repost, and you get to enjoy more damage for some time afterwards. For the physic, we're using the Thorny Crack tier for more damage with consecutive attacks, and the Opaline Heart tier for more defense. For the look, we have the Zamor Armor, the Zamor Mask, the Scaled Gauntlets, and the Scaled Greaves. You have no idea how happy I am to finally get this one out there. Hey everyone, if you like this video, please leave a like and a comment. Do the YouTube thing. And if you want people to play Nitrine with, then join my Discord server. And well, will there be more videos in this series? Well, coming up with ideas for a game this old that are interesting enough to share is pretty damn hard. This video has had multiple rewrites and many scrapped characters. I think I have exactly 1 more of these in me, and I will probably wait for Tarnished Edition this time. I hope you enjoyed this one though, and bye bye!